and on behalf of Ilsley Library, I welcome you to our Vermont Humanities Council Snapshot event, When Cultures Collide, with Rene Pellerin. We extend our thanks to our partners at the Vermont Humanities Council, as well as to the generous underwriters who make it possible for us to offer such a rich and robust programming. The sponsor of our entire Snapshot season is the Vermont Department of Libraries. Tonight, we come together from across the state to listen, to learn, and to be inspired in community. Before we begin, I have a few brief housekeeping items. I'd like to thank the Friends of Ilsley Library, whose support makes possible programming here at Ilsley. Thanks to Crystal Heyer for interpreting, and Tia for providing environmental information to Rene during the talk. Thanks also to Jacob Pelletier of the Vermont Humanities Council for facilitating a broad range of programs for the series. Thanks also to James Corbett and Kurt Broderson of MCTV for providing a live stream for our program. Our next Snapshot event, hosted by the Brownell Library, is the 1960s Fluxus art movement, Blurring Art and Life, with John Kalaki and Sean Clute. It's on September 18th at 7 p.m. Please be sure to register online to receive a link to the live stream. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Rene was born in Quebec, Canada. He grew up in Vermont, graduating from Austin School for the Deaf and later attending Gallaudet University. Long recognized by his deaf peers as a sought-after storyteller, Rene expanded his repertoire in recent years to chronicle DeafBlind life, learning through laughter as Rene The Unstoppable. He has taught numerous workshops on behalf of on being deafblind, having Usher Syndrome, and using haptics. He is a consultant for the DeafBlind Equipment Distribution Program for Vermont. And for many years, he was a weekly contributor to the Deaf Digest. Please welcome Rene Pellerin.
Thank you, Chris, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And some of you, might be a little bit confused. You're feeling like, okay, this is a guy I'm looking at, and it sounds like I'm hearing a woman's voice. So, folks might be confused by that. Many people, my blind friends, often think I'm a woman because the interpreters that work with me oftentimes are women. And my name is sometimes a female name. So I am a man. So we'll start there. All right, let's just get into it if we're ready. Slide, please. Oh, is there a clicker? Who has the clicker? Who's advancing the slides? I think Chris is that. Oh, oh, here we go. Thank you, Chris. So we'll start with this story I call Parting the Red Sea. my family had been on a trip traveling to the DC area. And we were in the Alexandria area, which is very close to DC if you're familiar with that area. So we were all, loaded up in the car, and we, headed out on our family trip from Vermont. And we always have the typical stops we make on that trip. We stop and see my wife's family. She has a sister who happens also to be deaf. We head through Connecticut, and then we go through Pennsylvania. We see part of New York. We make quite the trip of it. And Pennsylvania roads, I can always tell when we've hit Pennsylvania because the road topography is quite different. It's a lot rougher than many of the other states. And so that's how I know we're getting close to my wife's sister's house for the visit there. We take a break there, catch up, and then we head out from there onto the DC area. But it's a pretty long road trip overall. So we get to our hotel. And I really want to, get out and walk. Just because I want to really get my buns exercised, and sitting in the car doesn't really do that for me. So I want to get out there and get some steps in. So I want to walk in the downtown in Alexandria. And it's a old historic town. So there's a lot of cobblestone streets. And so I get my cane out. And I keep having this issue with my cane because I keep getting hung up in all of these cobblestones. And I know it's very historical and it's very quaint and they really want to preserve that history. But for me, it's impossible because I keep getting my cane stuck in these things. And every time I yank it out, I stab myself in the chest, which is frustrating for me. So I connected with the Vermont Association of the Blind after one of our trips and said, what can I do about that? And they said, actually, we've got something for that. It's this little device. It kind of looks a little bit like a mushroom, and they actually call it a mushroom, but it's not a mushroom that you can eat. So it's basically just a tip that you can put on the cane so that it sort of bounces off all of those cracks and crevices like in cobblestone so that it makes it much easier to navigate. So right now I'm using what they call a marshmallow. So that's this tip here. That also is not something you can eat, in case you're wondering. So anyway, technology, there's always new things out there to help folks like me who have hearing loss as well as a vision loss and who are deafblind. So anyway, on one of our trips, we got to the DC area, and it happened to be a July 4th, which worked out because there was going to be a very large display of fireworks. So we got to our hotel and got settled and got something to eat. And then we went out and found a parking spot so that we could head out to where the fireworks were happening. Because as you can imagine, it's the DC, Virginia area. It's a holiday weekend. It's July 4th. There are crowds like you couldn't imagine, So we're trying to find the exact, the best place to sit. We did finally find a place we thought we would have a pretty good viewing area. The kids went to do kid things, and my wife and I went and, spent a bunch of money. And the kids were spending our money sort of at the other end of town. So we found a spot to sit, and we kind of just enjoyed watching people go by. It was the place where we were sitting was right along the Potomac River, which is where the display was happening across the river. And I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but the Thomas Jefferson Memorial there is across the Potomac where we were sitting. And so that's a pretty historical place. We were kind of taking it all in, and night started to fall. It started to get a little darker and closer to the time when the fireworks were going to start. And then sort of people started filling in around us. And so my wife got sat down right next to me so that she'd be able to kind of help me access the fireworks if needed. And then all of a sudden there was this huge, loud cannon blast. And I felt like it was having a heart attack. I felt it in my bones, and I could feel my wife, Joan, next to me. She actually lifted up off the ground because it was such a loud noise and a loud explosion. And then the fireworks began. And so, as you know, fireworks kind of launch and then they go into the air, and I was having a little trouble tracking where exactly the color was happening. And I'm like, where are the fireworks? They're supposed to be starting. I don't see them. And so my wife helped me with her hand, sort of pointing but we were always just a second or two off. And she would point, and by the time I found her hand, the color had already dissipated. I could just see the smoke. So with my vision condition, I have what's called tunnel vision. So basically it's like looking through a funnel, so I only have this circle of vision. So locating something in space is pretty difficult, and it takes a little time, a little searching. So finally, the very last sort of the grand finale of the fireworks, when they put all the fireworks up at the same time, I mean, I was finally able to see that one because it's so many, I couldn't miss it. But that was really the only one I got full sight of, but that was plenty. That was a lot of light and color for me. So anyway, after the fireworks were over, we had to head out. And as I said, there was a huge number of people there. And my wife, Joan, was guiding me because it was after dark and it's hard for me to see after dark. And so I was kind of gripping with my nails onto her elbow. And I was almost getting disconnected from her, and I didn't want to get lost in the crowd. And so she took my hand and spelled cane. And so I took my cane out. And it was just like the parting of the sea, of the Red Sea. And I just put my cane on the ground, and all of a sudden everybody sort of got out of the way, and we were able to leave the fireworks without issue. And it was really just amazing. The cane was pretty powerful in that moment. So the parting of the Red Sea. Oh, here we go. Here's the visual for that one. So there we are with my magic cane. Alrighty. So this next story is about my experiences going to large deaf events. For example, the National Association of the Deaf has a biennial conference that they host where deaf and deaf-related folks come. Can be 2,500 deaf people from all over the United States coming together for meetings and workshops. There is a business meeting that happens for the organization. So there is a lot of socialization and a lot of social opportunities for deaf folks like myself. So I enjoy going to those conferences, and I always would just register, and they offer, all the registration information and kind of the explanation of all of the workshops that happen. And so I would always pour through that information and locate the rooms of the workshops that I want to go to. And then I take a look at the hotel map and map out exactly where I'm going to be as opposed to where the rooms are going to be, so that I'll be able to navigate myself from place to place. I have what's called Usher Syndrome, which is a condition that combines what's called retinitis pigmentosa, which means that you have a narrowing of your visual field. As I mentioned, the tunnel vision before. So that is the visual condition that I have. And when that retinitis pigmentosa is combined with deafness, it's called Usher Syndrome, and which is what I have. And it came about because people realized that there was a lot of deaf people who also had this visual condition of retinitis pigmentosa. And they found about between 8 and 12% of the deaf population actually have retinitis, or have Usher syndrome rather. There are a number of different reasons why that happens. The reason I have Usher syndrome is because my parents were actually third cousins to each other. They had the same last name, Pellerin, and they got married, and here I am. And my father's side of the family has 3 other folks who have Usher syndrome. And then myself and my younger brother also have Usher syndrome. So there's 2 in my sibling group as well. So anyway, back in the day, you know, my visual field was wider, and as I've gotten older, it's kind of narrowed, and my central vision has gotten a little different. So when I would go to these big conferences, sort of navigating, I had my cane, obviously, and so that helped me to navigate, but trying to find the room that the workshop was in and locating the signs on doors, those types of things was difficult. And if you've ever been to a conference, you know, as soon as workshops let out, everything lets out at the same time. And then there's suddenly 70 people in the hallway. And so I'm trying to navigate, and I've got people kind of going the other direction. I'm headed the wrong way in traffic, so to speak, and they're bumping into me. They don't, I mean, I had my cane, which worked well when I parted the Red Sea at the fireworks, but it wasn't working very well at these workshop situations because everybody's looking down at their phone. And so they're not looking for my cane. So this was a frustration for me for many years. And then so I would be at the conference for the week, and you know, then I would head home after, and there wasn't really much that I felt like I could do to improve my experience. And as I said, those conferences happen every 2 years. And so one year they sent me all of the information about the conference, and they're like, "Hey, come to the conference. We're having it, you know, wherever we're having it." And I thought, well, last time I went with my vision the way it is now, and even with the cane, it was pretty frustrating. I'm not sure I'm going to go. But then as I was reading through the information, I saw something called an SSP. We offer SSPs for deafblind people. And SSP stands for Support Service Provider. And so that would be someone who could help me at conferences like this. They could work much like Tia is here today, kind of giving me that environmental information. They could work as a guide. See, here's Tia hiding behind me here. So they could work as a guide to help me navigate the crowds and locate the workshops a little easier. And so I thought, wow, that could really change my experience at this conference. You know, I would have more of the information I need to navigate the conference independently. And so I said, yes, sign me up for an SSP. And I sent off my registration. And they sent me a confirmation saying, you're confirmed for registering for the conference, and we've got you an SSP ready. And so I headed out to the conference, and oftentimes it's a family affair. I bring the family. And my wife goes out with the 4 kids, and they do their thing, and I do my conference stuff, and I learn all the things at the workshops, and then we get together in the evening for family time. But anyway, so I got to the conference, and as soon as I walked in the door, there was a very large sign that said SSPs with a huge arrow. Very easy for me to see, very easy for me to find. So I was able to navigate to that area. There was a line of other deafblind people waiting to be connected with their assigned SSP. And so I waited my turn, and I said, I'm Rene, and I am registered at the conference, and I signed up for an SSP. So they took a look at their list and said, all right, you wanted an SSP. And they said, do you want a smoker? And I said, no, I do not want a smoker. I have to stand close to this person for a few days straight. So they said, okay, we won't give you a smoker. That's fine. We have to ask about that. So I got connected with my SSP, and they sort of took me aside, and we looked at the schedule of workshops to see exactly, you know, what I wanted to do. And so I caught them up on my plan for the days of the conference. I said, I'm going to this one and that one. And so we thought, all right, we've got a plan. So I grabbed their shoulder, and they're leading me through the crowd. I'm kind of hold onto their elbow. I don't know if you've seen blind folks being led through a crowd, but I hold on to the person's elbow. They kind of walk in front of me. So we got to the main hall, and it was time for a workshop to let out. And again, people are still on their phones. It was the same situation it had always been, but the SSP was like a football, you know, lineman. They're just like running in front of me and blocking and blocking and blocking. And I felt like, oh my God, I feel like the winning quarterback. I just can throw touchdowns. And I'm just like, all right, we got this blocker and this wonderful team with me. So that's the touchdown story. Here I am with my SSP who's just blocking the heck out of people. All righty. Alrighty. When I was working full time, I worked for the state of Vermont for many years. So, which meant I required the use of a lot of interpreters for communication access. Without interpreters, I couldn't very well communicate with my coworkers and do the work that I needed to do. I worked for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, which is now an old name. They've now rebranded, and I don't know exactly I can't remember what their new name is, but anyway, it's still vocational rehabilitation at its core. So I helped people with disabilities, any different types of disabilities, become employed. We provide training, maybe that's college or some other types of training. Anyway, we have a variety of different resources that we can provide for folks. So I was a VR counselor. I was a specific VR counselor called an RCD, or a rehab counselor for the deaf. So that was my job with the state for many years. When I started work for the state as a rehab counselor, the VR here in the state had never really worked, had a deaf employee, had never had to provide interpreter services, so they didn't really know what to do. And I said, you know what, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. So I said, well, I need to find an interpreter who's going to be able to work with me on a regular basis and provide that communication access. Because I worked with folks who were deaf and signed, but also people who just had some hearing loss and didn't know any sign language. I also worked with all of my coworkers in my office and with other offices in the state, and none of them knew sign language. So I was going to have an interpreter on a pretty regular basis. So I took a look at the list of interpreters in the state and the folks who were close to where I was going to be working. And, I kind of went through the list. I called up the first person, and this was in the days when I utilized a TTY for communication. And I don't know if anyone has ever seen or used a TTY. It was old technology for helping people like me who are deaf to talk back and forth. And so I had to have a TTY apparatus. The person I called also had to have a TTY apparatus. But that's the technology that was available to us when I first started working. But anyway, so I would, if the person answered when I called someone using the TTY, the light on my TTY would flash. That told me that they were talking into the receiver and not having it on their TTY. And so my job then was to kind of hit the buttons on the TTY. It basically looks like a little typewriter with like couplings on the top to hold the old phones. So I would hit buttons and they would make this terrible beeping racket. And the person on the other end said, oh, this is a TTY call. So I've got to put it on my TTY. So anyway, I got connected with her. And I said, hey, this is Rene. I really need someone to interpret for me at work. Could you do it? And she said, oh, sure. I'll do that. And so we set up a couple of meetings, and she came to interpret for me. And this first person I said was they had a lot of mouth movements. It looked like their mouth was like a mile wide. I was just like, that's just too much for me. I can't handle that. I said, she interpreted for a couple of my meetings, and I said, thank you very much, but I don't think that's going to work out. That's just not going to be someone I want to be looking at every day. So I went back to my list, and again, I went through the whole process again with the TTY and called. And see how I'm signing that I called these folks, because at that time it was rotary phones, met probably before some of you were born. I don't know, maybe you remember this kind of phone as opposed to the push button phone. I'm signing it differently because it was differently. Anyway, so I called the next person on the list, and I see the light flash, meaning they're talking, and I hit the button and, blow their eardrum out with the beeps, and they put their phone on the TTY, and I said, hey, this is Rene. I'm looking for somebody to come and interpret for me at VR a little bit. Do you think you might be available? And they said, sure. And so we set up a time to meet with a client. And this person had just a very, very high-pitched, excitable voice, which I could even tell was not going to be a fit for me. And I thought, okay, well, this is another one. This is not going to be. So again, thank you very much for coming in, but I don't think this is going to work out. So I went to the next name on my list, which happened to be someone who lived in my town. It was the name I was looking at. Let's see, it said Joan Pellerin. And I thought, well, that sounds familiar. Oh, wait, I know how I know that name. She's my wife. I guess I can't have her interpreting for me. So I got a big black marker and I just scratched out her name on the list because I can't have that. I don't want her bugging me at work. So then I went on to the next name, which was another interpreter who lived in the Northeast Kingdom area of the state, which in that area of the state, there's not a lot of deaf people, but there are 5 interpreters who at that time were living there. So it's like the most concentrated population of interpreters and the least concentrated population of deaf people. Is just an interesting thing. Anyway, so I called her up. And again, I went through the same process and blew her eardrum out with the beeps and all of that stuff. And I said, hey, it's Rene. I'm looking for an interpreter for some of my appointments. Could you come on down? And she said, sure, no problem. So we set up a couple of client appointments, and I started in on my VR spiel, and I could tell the way that she put my signs into English, that sounded just exactly the way I would like it to sound in English. And I thought, this is going to be a good match. And then her signing for the person who was talking to me was really fluent, and just I was able to understand her very well. And so I said, all right, you are hired. So she worked with me for a couple of years in the role of rehab counselor for the deaf. And then I was promoted to state coordinator for services for deaf and hard of hearing people. And I worked in that position for about 15 years. And so I worked in that position in many different capacities. I provided trainings and presentations. I did workshops. I was called in to consult on cases and provide technical assistance. You name it, I did it in that role. And I traveled all over the state to do that work. And this interpreter traveled with me. So one day I was at a presentation and I was kind of doing my thing, and that interpreter was there with me. And afterwards, people came up to ask some questions. I was trying to answer all the questions they had. And one woman came up to me and she said, she actually came up to the interpreter and kind of tapped her on the shoulder. And she said, hey, can I ask you a question? And my interpreter said, very professionally, said, well, I can't answer any questions right now. I'm working, but if you want, you can ask Rene a question. And so she went back to the end of the line and worked her way back up to me. And here I'm like, oh, here's this woman. I saw her talking to my interpreter earlier. And she said, hey, I just have a question. Are you guys married, you and your interpreter? Is that how this works? And my interpreter's eyes bulged out, like she was like, what the heck are you talking about? I could tell from where I stood that she was very shocked. And the National Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, or RID, has, certainly has tenets of professional conduct. And one of those prohibits interpreters from inserting their professional opinions. And I said, hey, Barb, I saw that facial expression. That's your personal opinion. You can't do that. So I gave her a little bit of a hard time about that. But anyway, one of those other tenets on that professional code of conduct says that you need to empower the deaf person that you're working with and not, take the right to make decisions. So she had to give me the power to answer that question about whether or not we're married. And so I thought, ooh, here's an opportunity for me. How do I answer this? And I could say the truth, which is no, of course we're not married. And I thought, well, I probably better do that because she's my ride home. I don't want to make her mad. But I thought, well, I also could say yes. And she would probably say, no, we're not married. I am a lesbian. What are you talking about? So that's my story. Married? And here we are. That's our illustration of me and my interpreter, Barb. She's telling everybody in that sign she's a lesbian, and I'm just throwing her a kiss there. But we worked together for 20 years. She was my designated interpreter. She's a wonderful woman, and I appreciate all of her years with me. So next slide, please. right, just checking in with Tia here. All right, this one, this touchy situation. This is a fairly new experience and story for me. I mean, you all don't know. Many of my stories are at their core true. I mean, there have been some creative edits just to make them a little more educational, a little more comical, but at the core, everything really happened to me. So I had a medical appointment. I was booked in to see an ENT to get some tender loving care on my ears, my nose, and my throat. So that's the ENT. I don't know if you've ever been to an ENT, but it's an ear, nose, and throat doc. But anyway, I was in for a cleaning, where they really just go to town on my ears. So I had, of course, an interpreter with me at the appointment. So we went in together, and we were in the exam room. And so I was at this is a more recent story. So I was more in need of what's called tactile interpreting. So she was sitting very close to me, and I was putting my hands on her hands to access her interpretation. So the doctor came in the room, and they had a student doctor with them. You've probably had that happen at some of your appointments. And I always say I'm happy to have a student come in. I like to pick on them and give them a hard time. So anyway, this doctor had a medical student with them for my appointment. And so they introduced themselves and everything. And so the doctor had the conversation with me, and my interpreter is there working with me. And so, as I said, we've got kind of my hands on her hands so that I can understand what she's signing to me. And so he does his thing and gets his little scope out, and he looks in my ears, and he said, "Well, you have got a ton of wax." And they actually had this kind of newer technology at the time, which was like a vacuum that they can stick in there and like suck out the wax, as opposed to having to like wash it out with water. So it was actually really cool. I felt like he was giving my eardrum like a little massage, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that feels so great." I was like, "Wow, that is nice." And then he went in and went to town on the other side, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that feels so good to have that like massage like deep inside your ear." And I was like, "Wow, that is great." So he finished up with the vacuum, and then he checked in one side, and the light came right through the other. So he knew he'd been successful in getting all the wax out. So after he did that, I was just talking with the doctor, about next steps and, what the plan was. And he said, "I don't have to see you back for several months. Why don't you come back in 8 months or so, and we'll check you again." And so he was getting ready to leave the room, and the medical student was like, "Can I just say, I mean, why are you guys holding hands? I just don't understand why you're holding hands this whole time." And I thought, does this look like holding hands to you? And I said, it's not so much holding hands. Like, you remember when you were in high school, and you may probably learned about Helen Keller. And I said, well, think of me like Helen Keller. And this is my Annie Sullivan. Okay. So that's what we're doing. We're not so much holding hands as we're, she's actually signing, and I'm putting my hands on her hands so that I can understand the signs, because I can't see very well. It's hard to communicate. And so I have an interpreter here with me who can sign. Obviously, I'm deaf as well. And so that's what we're doing. We're not so much holding hands as we are communicating. And they said, "Oh, okay. Oh, thanks for explaining." And I was like, "All right." So, I thought, that can be like a new service. You can go into the ENT, and then you come out with a girlfriend, So I thought that's my touchy situation. So here we are in the ENT's office. All righty. Next. All right, this is another fairly recent situation that happened to me. This is actually, I was headed into another medical appointment. I was in to see my eye doctor this time to get a checkup. I mean, I have a number of issues happening with my eyes. I have a number of professionals to help me because I have, as I said, Usher Syndrome and retinitis pigmentosa, which is a vision issue. So anyway, when I make an appointment for a medical appointment, I make sure that they are able to provide an interpreter. And then I reach out to the interpreter and I say, do you mind just meeting me at the front door so that we can go in together? I'll be standing at the front door. You find me. Because at that time, I didn't have access to someone like Tia who could get me to an appointment and kind of guide me in the building and get me into the waiting room. I just was kind of on my own. So I would ask the interpreter to fill that role. So anyway, I got someone, a volunteer driver who could drive me, and that person, those folks obviously don't know any sign language. So we just sit in the car in silence for the half-an-hour trip to the doctor's office, which actually in this case was at UVM Medical Center. So I don't know if you've been to UVM, but they have that large drive-up circle and you kind of get off. There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of people in that lobby coming and going for various reasons. And so there I am with my cane. So I navigate next to that big revolving door and I kind of stand there to wait for my interpreter as we had planned. So someone comes up to me and is trying to talk and I gesture that I can't hear them and that I'm deaf. And so they grab my hand and try to pull me. And I said, no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm going to stay right here. I'm trying to gesture and I'm just going to stay here. But they were very committed to their helping. And so they said, no, come on. And they're trying to pull me and I'm trying to stay there and say, no, I'm not. They were very stubborn. So she went into the building then and she comes back out with a second person. And the second person is holding an iPad, which you've seen an iPad. It's a small device. And so on the iPad, they've got me connected now to an interpreter on the screen. So it's a remote interpreter. We call that video remote interpreting, or VRI. So that's what they've come out. I'm trying to spell. I'm trying to make a V there with my hand and my hand cramped up. But anyway, so they bring this device out to me. But if I'm legally blind at this point time in my life, my vision is very limited. I'm standing out in the sun and they bring a screen to me, which has got glare. I said, I could sign to the person, and I was able to sign to the person to say, hey, I'm blind as well as deaf, and I can't actually see you. But tell them I'm waiting for my interpreter to meet me here. So I'm good. But I can't see anything that you're saying. So if you're going to sign to me, Mr. Interpreter, on the screen, I'm not going to be able to understand you. So just tell them that. So come to find out, my interpreter is actually on the other side of the door this whole time. She sees this whole kerfuffle and is able to make her way over to me. And I thought, oh, thank God you're here, because this lady was about to drag me inside by my hand. But anyway, this is my remotely amusing situation. So you see here it's depicted. Here I am with my question mark just standing there, and my interpreter's over there on the other side. Just missed the connection. Next slide, please. Oh, never. Oh, yes. Okay. All righty. Hockey, one of my favorite topics. So one day, when I was working for the DeafBlind equipment distribution program, we had a booth at an event up in the northeast part of the state. We were doing it for a technology fair for the blind. And so at that fair, there were many vendors with booths with a number of different types of technology that might be useful for blind people. And so every year they have those types of fairs around the state, just because we don't have a company here in Vermont who can provide those types of equipment. So we try to get out and really meet the community and give people the exposure, blind people and deafblind people both, so that they know what the technology is that's available to them. So that's sort of the purpose of those annual fairs. But anyway, I was there with a booth, and I had an interpreter with me, and then I also had a ride. I rode with the interpreter. The interpreter was fairly new to the state. So I got in the car and they had put in the address into their GPS. And so they were just going to follow the GPS to our conference site. And so, and then at some point in the ride, I feel that we've not on a paved road anymore. We are on, we are on a dirt road, and it's April in Vermont, so dirt roads aren't great. And so I can feel that we're kind of going all over the place, and then we're back on pavement, and then we're back on a dirt road, and I'm like, I don't know what are you doing? I said, what are you doing? And she's like, I don't know, I'm just following the GPS. This is what it's telling me to do. And so I thought, well, it seems like your GPS maybe is taking you the scenic route or something, but it's just going to be mud. It's going to be mud, one muddy road after another. But anyways, I suggested that we get back to Route 16 and the main road, and then I could sort of help navigate because I did drive before I had vision issues, and so I know fairly well that area. And I said, when you see 122, then you take that, and then that's going to get us where we need to go. There's going to be a covered bridge. When you see the covered bridge, you go through that. It's a very small covered bridge, but don't worry, it won't fall on us. So then she followed my directions to a T, and we were able to get there safely, and we got our booth set up, and we were greeting some of the conference participants, and one guy who also had Usher Syndrome, but was not someone who signed. He spoke for himself. But anyway, he came up to our table and said, hey, what's this? So I was kind of talking to him about that, and the interpreter was interpreting for me. And then he said, so you're signing, and then she's signing, and you've got your hands on her hands. So is that like Helen Keller? Is that what I'm seeing? And I'm like, well, I'm not Helen Keller. I'm Rene. But he laughed at my joke. But anyway, so I was talking him through some of the equipment. And then again, so workshops were starting to get started. So everybody was kind of headed to the workshop, and there wasn't anybody in the vendor hall anymore. So the booths were kind of empty. And so I was kind of feeling a little curious about what all those vendors had on their tables. And so I asked my interpreter to kind of take me around, and I was checking out some of the other technology. There's some screen readers, for example, things that were kind of interesting. And some tables had Braille displays. And the technology now is just amazing, especially around Braille. It used to be like a very large apparatus, but now they can make them very small, very sleek. They're expensive. They are between $2,000 and $5,000, these Braille readers, but they're very handy and very portable. But anyway, I was making my way around the different booths, checking out some of their equipment. And then I came upon a really big display that said blind hockey. And I thought, wow, blind hockey. Like, I'm Canadian born and I love hockey, I mean, that's part of my DNA. So I just thought, what is blind hockey? So I said to the guy at the table, I said, and who was blind himself, I said, hey, I'm Rene. And he's like, oh, I remember you, Rene. You're a funny guy. I've seen your show. And I was like, okay, great. Obviously, he's seen my show. He knows I'm funny. So I said, hey, it's good to see you again. Glad you were able to see my show at some point. But I said, I see this blind hockey sign. Like, what's that about? And so he said, oh, well, actually, it's hockey, but it's just with a little bit of a different puck. And he gave me a puck. It's like this big, it's huge. So plus it makes a sound, like it rattles, so that when it's hit around the ice, you can actually hear it and follow it, as well as see it because it's so big. So when you hit it, you like kind of listen for where it goes, and then you skate over to it. You find it that way. So he's like, hey, you want to play? And I was like, oh, well, the only problem is that I'm deaf, so I can't actually hear the rattle either. So I wouldn't be able to follow it visually or with my hearing. So he said, "Oh, okay, well," and he thought for a minute, and he said, "You know what? You can be our goalie. That'd be perfect for you." And I thought, me? I'm like, I can't hear it coming. I can't see it coming. That doesn't seem like the best idea for me. But I thought for a minute, and I thought, well, actually, I have an idea. I know how I probably could be a goalie. I'll just use my SSP, and I'll just put her out front. Just do this. Right? So that makes me the goalie. And then so here's my poor SSP with the puck coming at her. So there you go. Next slide, please. All righty, this is my window washer story. So at one time, I was going to the gym several times a week. I had with this deaf guy who would volunteer to come with me to the gym, and I would kind of pay his gas, and then he would get to use the gym for free to work out while I work out. Keep myself, trim and slim here. I get, you got to do it. Got to get the big muscles. Anyway, so that was our agreement that I had with this guy. So we had been going for weeks, and one day we got into the gym, and you can't wear street shoes in the gym, especially in the wintertime, because you come in with boots or wet shoes or whatever it is, and you've got to change into your gym shoes. So I'm changing into my gym shoes, and I get changed, and I go to reach out for him to say, "Hey, I'm ready to go," and I couldn't find him anywhere. He wasn't anywhere around. I thought, well, maybe he went to the bathroom. So I was like, I'll just wait. So I was waiting and waiting and waiting, and then I started to kind of look around. And again, with my tunnel vision, I see out the window a guy is washing the windows, and I was like, well, that's weird. He's washing the windows in the middle of winter, but that doesn't seem like the great idea. But I'm like, hey, if building maintenance wants that, let it, who am I to judge, right? So I just sit there waiting. And then I look again at the guy washing the windows. And again, he's kind of flailing. I said, he's the worst window washer I've ever seen. And then he kind of slows down his movements a little bit. And I see that it's not actually a squeegee he's holding, it's sneakers. And then I realized, wait, that's not a window washer. That's my SSP. He locked himself out of the building. He's waving his sneakers at me outside the door. And I thought he was trying to wash a window. So that's my window washer story. So here he is waving his shoes at me through the door. All righty, next slide, please. All righty, this one's about a real wedding. I got married August 11th, 1979. So my wife is impressed that I remember that date. So, so anyway, we were getting married near Hartford, Connecticut, near the area where my wife grew up, in a small town in that area. So we had a hotel booked there. And we had family and friends, obviously, in town. And we basically kind of took over this little hotel. But anyway, my wife's cousin and I had some errands to run to get ready for the wedding. We had to go get our tux and, the shoes, and we've got to get the corsages. She'd given me a list of things to do to get prepared for our wedding. So we were out and about doing our errands. So we went, we got the tuxes, we got the shoes, we got the corsages, we were checking things off, feeling very productive. And then we got back in the car to head back. And we stopped at an intersection where there was a stoplight. And we were a couple of cars back, but right in front of us was a small moped. And so we were just kind of sitting in traffic. And then all of a sudden, the wind kind of picked up, and it was just all of a sudden very, very windy. And this poor guy on the moped, he took off at the light, and he was like getting blown over with the wind. And I could see how strong the wind is, even though I couldn't hear it, because I could tell he was almost tipping over. The light was hanging on the wire and just like almost horizontal with the wind. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a storm coming in. So we got our green light, and we took off down the road. And then we got closer to the hotel, and there's an old sort of military museum that was on that same street. And as we passed by, we saw that many of the airplanes that had been on display on that front lawn had been tipped upside down. And we thought, that must have been some really strong wind that came through here. So we got to the hotel, and we were fine. We were kind of got our clothes all put away. We were getting ready for the rehearsal dinner that night. So we went down to the restaurant, the whole group of us, and we got to the restaurant, and they said, hey, we don't have any electricity, so we can't do the rehearsal dinner here because the storm took out our electric. But they said, don't worry, we'll find another spot for you that does have electricity. So they helped us make a reservation somewhere else. And so we got to a different restaurant, which worked out well. So we had our rehearsal dinner, and we ate. And then we got back in our cars to get to the hotel. And my wife and I, we went our separate ways for the night before the wedding. And, I had a great sleep, very excited about the wedding the next day, and seeing Joan again. And so I was just very happy, ready to go, thinking about all of our life together. But anyway, so the next morning, I got up and got ready, got all beautied up, got my tux on, got my corsage on, got my shoes shined up, ready to go. And my friend, who was the best man, we got in the car to get to the church. So we drove up to the church, and we see, just as we approached the front of the church, there was this huge tree right in front of the church that had come down in the storm and had fallen like across in front of the church. And you could see it was a huge old tree, and it had been completely uprooted, and the roots were just huge. My friend was standing in front of the roots, and the roots were twice her height. It was amazing, the size of this tree and how it managed to miss the church. And I thought, well, maybe is this some kind of a message from God that we should or we shouldn't? I don't know. What does this mean? So anyway, so we got into the church, and the electricity is out in the church as well. So we get to where the priests are kind of getting ready for the service, and we have a chance to talk with them. And people are, arriving, and they're taking their seats in the pews. And then my wife, the bride, comes into the church and immediately sees how dark it is and is thinking, oh my gosh, Renee's not going to be able to see me. It's too dark in here. We had another friend who was an interpreter who was saying, hey, Rene, can you see in here? And is it going to be light enough? He said, Joan's worried that you can't see. Can you see? I don't know. And they're kind of communicating between Joan and I. And I said, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. Tell her not to worry about it. I can see just fine. And so this friend is kind of going back and forth between us. And as for someone with Usher Syndrome, something that maybe you don't know about Usher Syndrome is that it is harder to see in the dark. So she had reason to be worried. So, but my answer that, oh, don't worry about it, did not satisfy her. So the interpreter comes back and said, look, I told Joan you said don't worry about it, but she said she's worried about it. So we need to figure out a way to get more light in here. And so I said to one of the priests, I said, do you have candles? He said, oh, we got candles. So we lit a bunch of candles, candles on every surface, candles on anything that would stand still. We just lit candle after candle after candle. And so I said, all right, is that enough light? I think this is going to be enough light. So, all right, Joan is satisfied. So we get, I go up to the altar, and I'm waiting to see my bride coming down the aisle. And so I see the doors to the church open down at the back of the church, and I see my beautiful bride headed towards me. Unfortunately, the light behind her made it so all I could see was a black outline of, I said, oh, she's so beautiful. That black blob is just so pretty. What a wonderful black blob dress. And so I could just see her making her way in this shadow up to me. And then when she got to the front of the church, up closer to me, she said, "Can you see? Did you see?" And I said, there was this other priest who was working with us who could sign, and so he was kind of interpreting for us through the wedding. And I said, the candles, they're great, but I need them to be closer, and so I can't really see you. And so he said, all right, fine, we'll move some of these candles a little closer. And I said, okay, great. And so he moved some of the candles closer so I could see his signing. And I said, well, they need to be a little bit closer. And he said, okay, well, I'll move them a little bit closer. So he's getting these candles closer and closer to him in his priestly garb. And I was like, and then I said, okay. And then he's trying to sign to me without getting his garb into the candle flame. So he's signing like, hey, can you, and he keeps drawing his hands back to his body really close so that, hey, do you take Joan? And so he didn't have a lot of room to make his signs because the candles had to be so close to his body. So he kept drawing his hands back very quickly and signing very close to his body. And it was kind of comical to watch because I thought at any moment he's going to burst into flames. And I kept saying, hey, I can't see you. I need more. And he's like, I can't give you any more. I'm going to catch on fire. And so here is our almost flaming priest who is trying to interpret for me at our wedding. I just do a quick time check here. How much time? Okay, great. So before I wrap up, I do just want to say and give credit to the artists who did all of these drawings here in my PowerPoint and really illustrated all of these experiences. So Adam, you're here somewhere. If you can just stand, if we can give Adam a round of applause for his wonderful illustrations of my stories. So I talked with him about the things that I wanted to show in these illustrations, and he sent me, and we did it all through email. He lives here in Middlebury, actually, and so we did it all through email. I don't live here in town, and so he just did some really amazing work and really caught the essence of these stories in his illustrations. So I really appreciate that. So is this the last slide, or is there? Oh, it is. There we go. Perfect timing. Thank you so much. What's next? Is there anything you would like to say, Chris, or is that a wrap?
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I can't see you or hear you, so you have to stomp your feet on the ground. All this ground isn't very receptive to that, but that's how you would applause for me, because I can't see or hear your applause. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. Enjoy your afternoon. Thank you.